Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of Mighty Blaze, which began when the pandemic did, shuttering indie bookstore doors and canceling authors' tours, including my own. And I'm really, really excited today because we have the amazing writer Kathleen Schine. And look at this gorgeous cover, Kunstlers in Paradise. Look at that bathing suit. Don't you wish you could fit in that? Because I certainly do. This book is literally racking up the raves. Carcass Reviews, who generally hates a lot of stuff, has called it dreamy, drifty, and droll, studded with lush descriptions and historical gems. Everyone, especially Shine's many fans, will enjoy. Um, there was a rapturous review in the New York Times, which of course I can't find now. And there's like many, many other wonderful reviews. I want to read the bio that Kathleen Schine wrote for herself because it's hilarious. Um, Schine is the author of oh no, that's the serious one. As a child, Kathleen Schine dreamed of growing up to become a graduate student. Years later, her childhood ambitions were realized when she entered the University of Chicago's graduate program in medieval history. There was notice that she had no memory for names, dates, or abstract ideas, and she was thus forced tragically to abandon her lifelong dream. Before this disappointment, however, while on a fellowship studying paleography in Italy, she made an important discovery. She liked to buy shoes. So when the welcome of academia was rescinded, Shine was able to pursue a career in an area which was rewarding but short-lived, as she could not get a job. Increasingly desperate and having failed as an intellectual, she discovered her calling as a pseudo intellectual and went on to write for The New Yorker, The New York Review of Books, and more. She's the author of so many wonderful books. This comes the serious part. The Love Letter, which was also made into a wonderful movie starring Kate Capshaw, Rameau's Niece, which was also made into a movie. Her other novels are Alice in Bed, To the Birdhouse, The Evolution of Jane, She Is Me, The New Yorkers, The Three Weismans of Westport, Finn and Lady, They May Not Mean to, but They Do, great, great title, and The Grammarians. This is her new novel, Kunstlers in Paradise, which is about the power of stories and how we tell them. And it's also about the pandemic when a 24-year-old sort of hipster guy living in Brooklyn is sent to live with his older grandmother, Mamie, and she begins to tell him stories, which changes both their lives. So first, welcome, Kathleen. I'm so happy to have you here and to show off the cover of this beautiful book. Whoops, of course I'm missing the camera, right?
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. This
And
is great.
I also want to tell people we at the Blaze encourage you to please shop at indie bookstores. I'll go walk to your favorite one and you can buy every single one of Kathleen's books, or you can go to bookshop.org and they will tell you which indie bookstore is closest to you. Also, please ask questions. Post them in the comments. We'll be asking them, or post comment or whatever you want. Okay. So, my first question that I have for you is about the power of stories and why we love them. And I wanted you to tell us about you. Did you love stories as a kid? And did you love them? And also, I wanted to know the difference between being the storyteller, like Mamie is in the novel, and being the recipient of the story, like her nephew Julian is.
Oh, I love that last question, and
Yeah.
I think it's really important. The being the recipient, listening to stories, for me, is one of the great joys. I'm not a wonderful storyteller at the dinner table. I can't tell jokes. As I'm telling the story, I forget the punchline. I'm not, I mess that part up in real life. Um, but listening to stories is just, there's something so magical about it. And listening to the stories of people's lives is just for me, one of the great pleasures of humanity, of being with other people. um, I did love stories as a child. I mean, my father read a lot of books to us. That was one of the things he loved to do, and they were books that he had read as a child. So, so it was a lot of Dr. Dolittle and Uncle Wiggly, and sort of books from the 20s and 30s, and which my brother and I loved, and we would sit in the living room, and he would read to us. So yeah, I'm not a big short story reader, and I cannot write one as of now, because I don't entirely understand exactly what they are. I love them. It's sort of like poetry. I know I get it. I am moved. I'm touched, but I don't understand how it was made. Novels for me are different, and I just can jump right in. But yeah, the stories that people tell are always wonderful, and my grandmother used to tell us stories about when she was a child and growing up, in a family of, I think, 11 wild children in one house, and how naughty they were. And it was, and they would the Hebrew tutor would come, and the children would hide in boxes and or chase them around, or so it was always very funny. And I associate stories of grandparents with fun and mayhem, I guess.
I love that. I also love what you said about the difference between short stories and novels, because
Yeah.
I don't like to write short stories either, and I sometimes read them, but not a lot. But I always feel like a short story is like a brief, passionate affair, whereas a novel is more like a marriage, where it sort of spreads out and it can be messy. And I just like the form better. So I want to talk about Mamie Kunstler. She's 93 years old and she's amazing. Let's just look at this picture of her again. um, she came from Venice and then the pandemic and everything sent her back to LA, and her nephew Julian is staying with her. So were you writing this during the pandemic or afterwards? What was your writing life during that time? And how did this writing this novel help you? Did it make you feel less alone because there was Mamie and Julian? And
Um, well, I started writing it before the pandemic because what I was initially interested in was the emigre community in Los
Mhm.
Angeles. I'm a relatively new Los Angelina. I think I've lived here, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, but that just seems like a minute. And so I had discovered there was this community during the war, of these very eminent intellectuals and composers and musicians and writers, who all wound up here for partly because of Hollywood. They could, possibly get jobs. There were already actors and directors here from Eastern Europe, from Germany, from Austria, and partly because the Hollywood community raised money and agreed to sponsor people coming in, Jews coming in from Europe. And I found this so interesting. I had no idea, as a New Yorker, I was very provincial, and I thought LA had no culture, until I moved here. And so this was, I'm always discovering and being fascinated by these new facets of this weird and very wonderful city. So I had started doing a lot of reading and research and trying to, and I knew Mamie was a character as a child, but I didn't know where to go from there. I didn't want to write a historical novel. And then one day then the lockdown came, and then I thought, well, that's it. I'm not writing a novel at this terrible time. I can't write, I can't think. What It doesn't make any difference. Who cares about anything right now? I'd call home, I'd call New York and talk to my mother and just hear sirens in the background, talk to my brother and just hear sirens in the background. My 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 son said, who one of my both my sons live out here, but the younger one said that, one of his friends was like stuck in his studio apartment, but he was running out of underwear. And I was like,
Wash
Does he
it.
have a, does he have a sink? But they don't know anything. So anyway, so the whole thing was just a nightmare, really a
Yeah,
nightmare.
it
And I didn't
was.
know, and I just thought, well, I'm done. It's over. And I was sitting in the garden, and it was spring, and all the flowers were out. The jasmine was out. It smelled beautiful, and I was just sitting there thinking, "This is so terrible. I'm in this paradise, and my family and friends are in New York, dying." And the guilt that I felt was just enormous. And I made this connection at that moment because I had been reading so many memoirs of the emigres who came to LA in the 30s and 40s, and they felt such tremendous guilt. They were so grateful to be in this paradise. At the same time, it just accentuated how terrible everything was, how their entire world was in flames in Europe. And it became a kind of bridge for me between the two periods. Not that they're comparable. The pandemic was not the Holocaust, but there was a tie, an emotional tie. And that's when I realized I could have, this younger, that's when I thought, okay, Julian is the grandson. He's coming. He's
Right.
getting stuck with his grandmother. And that's when I really started writing it. So I'm not sure that it helped me uh, get through because I had these characters, but at least I was doing what I do rather than just sitting staring guiltily at the blue sky, which is what I had been doing before. So,
Was any part of that sitting staring at the blue sky? Did any part of that get into Julian, who sort of wants to do everything but does nothing?
yeah, Julian is what Trollope called a hobbledehoy. These young men. That was one of the things that I love about Trollope is these young men who are sort of feckless and hapless and not doing much of anything, but you feel such sympathy and love toward them. And so there was that about Julian, but at the same time, he is a kind of autodidact who goes from one passion to another, none of them very useful. It's not useful to study alphabets without studying the languages, right? It doesn't make any sense, but that's something he became very involved in, and military history. And so his sense of guilt absolutely
Yeah.
was something that I truly could understand, and eventually he could understand
Hmm.
Mamie's and uh, her generation and her milieu, their sense of guilt during the war, and that kind of helps him grow as a person and leave hobbledehoyhood behind.
That was my son's favorite word when he was 2, hobbledehoy. So I'm happy to
Really?
hear it. Yeah,
When
I
did he
love
hear
that
it?
word.
It is a wonderful word and
It's a wonderful.
concept, but a 2-year-old to even know that word, I'm very impressed.
Well, he knows it because I said it a whole lot, because it was one of my favorite words, and I used it a lot in the stories I would tell him. All right, I want to talk about Mamie some more. I'd love to have you talk about ageism and how Mamie defies it, because she's this extraordinary woman. And to me, she reminds me of all these fabulous, glamorous older women who are always parading around in the Upper East Side in Manhattan, and they're wearing whatever the hell they want. Where did Mamie come from?
Well, Mamie, well, partly the more serious and more accurate parts of Mamie came from a woman named Salka Viertel, who was one of these emigres and lived in the Palisades, I guess, in Pacific Palisades, and she came from Vienna, and she was a very important figure in that period. She had a salon, really. I mean, every Sunday people would gather at her house. And it was a place where people could speak in German and could argue with each other. And but there were also a lot of actors, and it was people networked. They helped each other. There was gossip. They ate good chocolate cake. They drank good, strong coffee. She wrote a wonderful memoir called The Kindness of Strangers. And that book really influenced me. And I thought, what a wonderful character she was. Um, but Mamie, her Mamie-ness is very unlike Salka. She just grew. I had a rather not imposing, a rather amazing grandmother. And my mother was a sort of larger than life figure in a lot of ways, and they were both very funny. And a lot of their humor and their vision of life kind of seeps into various characters that I'm writing. But Mamie was Mamie. She just sort of grew into Mamie.
She was wonderful, wonderful, alive character. I want to talk about the story world now as it bounces from New York to LA and of course to Vienna. But the most interesting thing to me was that Julian is sort of a dyed-in-the-wool New Yorker, and he comes to LA, and his feelings about LA start to change, and he starts to change at the same time. Can you talk about why you did LA and Brooklyn, and then what place means to you personally?
Well, one of the reasons I was really interested in writing this book in the beginning was because I wanted to explore LA more. I'm kind of a hermit. I'm a little on the edge of agoraphobia. I don't do much. I mean, we just brought our car in to be it's 1 year old, the car, and it just went in to be serviced. It has 2,230 miles on it. So and that's including a big long trip up to Mammoth last year. So yeah, I don't go out much. And one of the things I love about Venice is you can walk everywhere, and it's a community that has it's not like New York, but it has that walkability and that sort of village, a village, not Greenwich Village, but a sort of village feel that New York has. It just does. No matter how big the buildings or where you are, you're in your neighborhood when you're in it. But I wanted to explore LA, and I thought, oh, I'll go visit all these houses because Thomas Mann's house is still here.
Right.
Leon, I can never pronounce his last name, Feuchtwanger, his house, Villa Aurora, is here. There, most of the houses, Salka Ferdol's house is here. And I thought, well, I'll go and visit all these houses, take a look at them. And then the lockdown came. And honestly, I thought, oh, phew, I don't have to get in the car and go look at all the houses.
I know, there's that guilt, right?
Yeah, I was like, oh, good, I get to stay home. Moving to LA for me was wonderful. I love it. I lived in New York for 40 years. I loved it, raised my kids there. It's a wonderful place. But at a certain point, I realized my favorite place in New York and the thing that I would miss was Central Park. And when I realized that, I thought, you know what, you can move, because my wife had this house here, and which we had been renting out, and suddenly we thought, why are we in New York, and we're older, and the noise was, and we just thought, this is ridiculous. We're going to move. But it takes me a long time to feel at home enough in a place to write about it. And that was one of the things I liked about Julian and Mamie. They were both at one point newcomers. And so they see LA the way I saw it, as someone who, wasn't, knowing and saying, I took this street and then I took that street. They were confused, and it was all new. And that's how I felt. And so that was a way to examine this place and be in this place. Because, other than that, I've really mostly written about New York or Westport, Connecticut, where I grew up. And it just takes me a long time to feel comfortable with how the light is in different seasons and at different times of the day, and what the gravel feels like. I mean, it's all different. So this gave me a way in, which really meant a lot to me, especially during the lockdown. I mean, all I did really was walk the dog, but it gave me a much better sense of
Right.
my little neighborhood here.
I love that. I have kind of a weird writerly question for you. So the Kunstlers learned that you have to be willing to abandon things in order to start new, which of course is a great lesson for everyone, even though it's hard to do. So I wanted to ask, does this also refer to writing for you when something isn't working and you just can't bear to abandon it? What do you do?
I'm a fairly slow writer, I think, because I think a lot and procrastinate a lot before I start writing. So I don't have any abandoned novels in my drawer. I don't have any abandoned short stories in my drawer.
Wow.
I kind of get an idea, and I may change it a lot and cut a lot of things out and throw a lot away, but and the idea itself may change tremendously. I mean, it almost always does, but I just keep going. And the computer's been a sort of wonderful thing for me, because you're just constantly revising. I mean, it's
Right.
terrible if you're, when I was sort of stuck on this novel, I would write a sentence. This happened with the novel before as well. The first time in my long life of writing that I got any kind of writer's block. And it was, with the last one, it was the Trump years. And then it was
Oh, yeah.
this one. And it was just very hard to concentrate. So I would type out a sentence and look at it and say, worst sentence ever written, history of literature. And I'd erase it. And I'd write a new sentence. And I'd say, that's the worst sentence. And so that was a disaster, and I wasn't making any progress. So what I did was take a pencil that I hated because it had such a hard bed that you could barely see it, and just sat there and just wrote in a notebook, which I couldn't see as I was doing it because the lead was so hard, it was so light. And then afterward, I could look at it and revise, which is the best way to write. You just write and you don't worry. It doesn't have to be art while you're writing. It doesn't ever have to be art. It just has to be writing and interesting. And then from there, I could move on. But so there are ways to get around that kind of being stuck. But throwing stuff out, yeah, sometimes I have to do that, and I have trouble in life. You should see my closet. And with books too, it's hard. And so a lot of times I just find a way to, how people go shopping in their closets. I find a way to make it work in a different way, because there was a reason I wrote whatever it is I wrote. It may not work where it was supposed to, but maybe then I move it over here, or I think about it differently, or I do it from the other person's point of view, or I change it from first person to third person, and suddenly it works.
Right.
So I fiddle a lot rather than just moving on. I'm a fiddler, I think.
Do you find that your previous book teaches you any sort of lessons that you apply to the next book, or is it all just totally a new thing?
Well, I always think, I finally learned how to do this. And then I start the next book and I haven't learned that. I have to learn it all
over again.
So yeah, it's always new. But I always think, yes, now I know. After I wrote The Three Weismans of Westport, which was kind of inspired by Sense and Sensibility, I thought, now I understand what a plot is. Now my books can have these great plots. And then got to the next book and it was like, no, it's just drifting off the way it always does. So no, I never learned. I mean, I'm sure I do without realizing it, but there's certain things I make sure to remember, which is when you get, sometimes I think, well, how do I get this person from here to there? And one day I had this revelation, which was, I'm the boss. I just put them there. It's like really
That's right. That's right.
like that. And those things I've come to learn over the years. But it's yeah, it's always new, and it's always sort of fascinating what you think to do, what you forget you can do, and suddenly realizing you have this ability as the writer to, for example, in this book, there's an orange tree, and that figures in the book, and I kept running over to my neighbors to check the status of their orange tree to make sure I wasn't having oranges grow in the wrong season. But because I was moving things around constantly, and
Mhm.
so you can get in trouble doing that. In one book, I had a woman who was 11 months pregnant because of doing,
Oh my God.
which we caught, but so you can mess
Right.
things up
Yeah,
that
you
way.
do.
But so I kept rushing over and saying, "Oh, okay, so now there are flowers. Oh, look, there's little oranges." And then suddenly I thought, this is my book. This is my orange tree. I made it up. It can
Right.
be in bloom whenever I want it to be. It's a magic orange tree, and that's the way it is. And so every once in a while you get this sort of revelation that, oh, the orange tree has oranges, and that's the way I want it.
That's hilarious. So I finally found the New York Times review of yours, and which leads to another question. The New York Times said, as always, Shine's delighting language is contagious. She offers up words like baubles, turning them this way and that to catch the light. I find that just a delicious kind of comment, and I want to know, so what comes first for you, character or language? Or does the language just sort of come along with the character? Or do you go back and polish stuff?
Oh, I polish a lot, but I think what happens is the characters begin talking to each other, and that's when the language that's when the language that's when they find their language, once they're really interacting, and that's when I find my tone for the book, which is the hardest. That's the hardest thing for me. That's the thing at the beginning. It's like, can I find the right tone for this subject, for these characters? And the more I look at them and think about them, and the more they think about each other, the more that kind of becomes clear. But yeah, I love words, and so sometimes I find that the way the book is going is determined by the last word that I wrote. It's pointing me that way, and rather than making a decision to go that way and then finding the language for it. The language often is just leads me this way or that. Because that, for me, that's the dream. That's the fun part.
I have a quote from Mamie. She thought it was time to remember rather than to forget. She wanted to put light in a dark place. Um, I love that. That, she grew old and all the stuff that she had wanted to push away, she suddenly realized that there was a difference in forgetting and not thinking about stuff and letting it out. Because when you try not to think about stuff, it's still inside you, causing all kinds of trouble. Um, in a way, I felt like she was saying, story is what can save us. Do you agree with that?
I don't know if they can save us at this point. I don't know if anything can save us, but
Yeah.
I do feel that they can lend some continuity and give people some perspective, which is one way of saving things, is a kind of perspective that is not just your own, but being able to broaden that and look at things in different ways. And I think stories pass down, even though they change and are
They do
mutilated
change.
by our memories and everything, there's something in them. There's a reason that someone's telling you a story. There's not necessarily a moral to the story, but there's an emotion in the story or an event in the story that is useful for the person to tell. For some reason, it's meaningful. And if that can become meaningful to you, then there's been real communication. And then there's a kind of hope of continuity and of continuing, which is, I think, what stories, in their most primitive way, what they're really about, rather than, people talk about expressing themselves and all of that. And
right. That's not the point.
no, I mean, it's part of
it's some of the point, but it's not everything.
And it matters. But a lot of times what you're expressing is not necessarily yourself, but something that's very, very important, that you find important, and that then you can pass that along, or to make people laugh. I mean, there's also that.
Right.
Or just to amuse people or interest them. And those things are very important. Yeah.
I have another Mamie quote. I keep feeling like there should be a separate little book about the quotes of Mamie, because she's such a great character. Anyway, she says, "If you don't pay attention, life passes you by." And that just really resonated with me. And I wanted you to talk about that in terms of Mamie and in terms of you.
Well, I think for Mamie, especially as someone in her 90s with no life right now to speak of, right? She's in lockdown with her rather callow, sweet, intelligent, but a little bit callow grandson, and her helper, who, whose English is a whole is a whole poetry unto itself. So she, if she doesn't think about things and notice things, what is there? But also, she's lived a long life, and looking back on it, was she really there and in it? And how real is it when she tells a story about it and remembers it? And there are also stories, of course, that you don't tell, doesn't tell, that are also lived very fully. So, yeah.
We have some audience questions. Okay, the first audience question is, do you read when you write, or do you have to be careful, as not just research books, because I know in the acknowledgments there's a whole lot of books you read, but do you read for pleasure when you write, or do you find it interferes with the writing process?
I don't read contemporary fiction when I write, because I steal, I mimic, without realizing it. And I remember once I wrote a sentence and I thought, this is really a banal sentence. Where did that come from? And then I realized I was just accidentally channeling something I had just read. And I just stopped reading. At that point, I just stopped reading anything that I wouldn't want to channel. So I sometimes will read 19th century novels, because I don't mind if I write a sentence that sounds like that's highly influenced by one of them. But mostly I read nonfiction when I'm working. And the thing, I also read at night. I read mysteries, and I found that I have to be very careful, because some of them I like, even though they're not very well written. And but I've really gone back to sort of reading mysteries from the 1920s for the same reason. So
that's wonderful.
Yeah, I'm so susceptible to what I hear. I'm a mimic. That's one of the things that that I do. And so I have to really be very, very careful. So nonfiction is great for that, but fiction, no, I guess. And I'm therefore about 3 years behind in my contemporary novel reading.
But that's good, because then you're not overly influenced by whatever the media is saying or not saying.
That's true. That is true.
So that's a plus.
Yes, I agree. I have the books. I just haven't read them yet.
Oh, we have another audience question. I'm always curious if writers dream about the characters or story during the writing process. That's an interesting question.
That is
Thank you, Sylvia.
interesting. I don't think I actually dream about them, but I sometimes am confused. I'm thinking, oh, I have to tell so and so something, not asleep. I'm awake, and then I realize, no, so and so is your character in the book. She or he is not real. You do not have to tell him this, Or I think, oh, he would be so interested in that, and then I think, no, he's okay. And sometimes, it's stuff I can use, but sometimes it's a book I've just finished writing and you can't use it anymore. And the characters are still, in my head, and we're still communicating and sort of discovering each other. And that's a little frustrating sometimes, because you think, ooh, maybe that would have been, something
Right.
work in the book, but but I don't think I dream about them. I don't know. I haven't ever thought about that. I have to,
You probably will now.
if I ever do, I'll let you know.
And we have another audience question. What did it feel like to see your books being made into movies? Did the characters feel like the characters you had created? And was that an okay thing for you?
They don't feel like the characters I created at all. And that's as it should be, I think. Once you give your book over to be turned into a movie, the people who are making the movie are not writing a novel, they're writing a movie, and they're filming and they're directing a movie, and it has different requirements and it has to be different. And I made that decision. 2 books have been made into movies. One was a very small independent movie, and one was a bigger movie. And one I got a lot of money for, and one I got like practically nothing for. And both times I just thought, well, if you're going to do this, you have to let go. And I did, and I wasn't involved with either one. And I don't enjoy watching them at all.
That's interesting.
Especially if they use a line from one of the books verbatim. I find that very disturbing and weird. And so
that's so interesting. Wait, why?
Because it's out of context. It's in the
wrong
place.
Right. Okay.
It doesn't feel right. And I used to have trouble listening to audiobooks of my books as well, just even a few sentences. But now this book has a really good reader, so I like this one. But no, it's very hard. It's just it's one thing to say, okay, my book is on the shelf. No one can change it. Whatever they do with the movie, it's the movie. They haven't done anything to my actual book that I wrote and have all the words where I want them. And that's fine. I can do that. I'm happy to do that. But, and you hope that the movie will work as a movie. But then to actually hear your words coming from an actor on a screen out of context, it's just too weird. I found it uncomfortable. It was like looking at a weird part of your body naked that you never see.
That's a great analogy.
And it's like, ew, I don't want to see like my elbow in close up. So yeah.
It's very nice to see that you're as hilarious in person as you are on the page. Okay, so I have one last question. It's a question I always ask because I happen to be a very obsessive person. What's obsessing you now and why?
Okay, well, I am reading a book reviewing a book called After Sappho, which is absolutely wonderful. And so I'm reading a lot about the many characters that are referenced in this book. So right now I'm reading a biography of Natalie Barney. I missed the whole, obsession in my trajectory of sexuality and identity and all of that. I came to my Sapphist position rather late in life. And I missed the kind of obsession that many women I know had with, Gertrude Stein and Virginia Woolf.
Right.
Were they or weren't they? And blah, blah, blah. And Natalie Barney and Paris and the Belle Epoque and all that. And I just wasn't interested, and still not, so I'm sort of brushing up my Shakespeare and reading a lot about these women, and they were kind of nutty. I mean, they were obsessed with the whole period. I guess they were obsessed with ancient Greece, and so they'd walk around in togas and in Paris, in their sandals. I mean, it's very interesting. A whole new world for me. So that's
I love that. And I lied because we have one new question. This is from Dottie. I love the cover of your new book. Did you participate in designing it? This is a gorgeous cover. It's just absolutely gorgeous.
I did not participate. When I first saw it, I fell in love with it. Then I got like cold feet, and I thought, does this look like a beach book? And
oh no, look at her face.
And think, what? This is not a beach book. Yeah. And then I gradually.
She's disturbed.
And then I gradually kind of realized, no, it's not. And it's perfect. And I love it. It's beautiful. I mean,
it's beautiful.
It's just beautiful. And no, I had absolutely nothing to do with it except to approve it. And I'm very grateful to Holt and all of those people for coming up with this.
The interesting thing about the cover is that it's also really emotional because, yeah, it's a beautiful young woman in a bathing suit, but her expression is sort of something's going on there. And also, yes, it's a beautifully hot day, but she's trying to shield her face from the sun. So there's a whole lot going on there that's just absolutely lovely. It's a perfect cover.
That is also, as my agent said, when I said, what if people think it's a book, a beach book? And she said, Kathy, there's an umlaut.
That's right.
Okay,
That's right.
She said, there's an umlaut. Basta.
Okay, so I want to remind everybody again, please buy all of Kathleen's wonderful books at an indie bookstore. You can go to bookshop.org. Thank you all for coming. This interview will live forever on a Mighty Blaze YouTube station, so you can watch it along with other wonderful videos. And if you want to subscribe, everyone at a Mighty Blaze will love you. And also, I most particularly want to thank Cathleen Schine for this most delightful interview. I love it when I get to laugh when I'm talking with somebody, and this was just sort of nonstop and smart and wonderful. And thank you so much. So I'll see everybody else next time. And Kathleen, you just stick around for a little bit. Bye, everybody.
Bye.